Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays on the Pagan Perspective, and this April we're choosing our own topics from a list of several. So this week I have chosen to talk about shamanism. The topic for this week comes from Dustin, and it reads, I know this may be a weird request, but Pagan Perspective has talked about many religions but never about shamanism, and I was wondering if you would make a video on it. I'm very curious about it and would appreciate any information you can give me on it, especially on Native American shamanism, and how does one become a shaman? So first of all, while we may have not spoken about shamanism in such specific terms as the practice that is known as shamanism, or we haven't used that word to describe it, we have definitely covered a lot of different topics that have to do with shamanism over the years. We've covered a lot of shamanistic practices. For example, I looked back at the Pagan Perspective blog, paganperspectivecollab.blogspot.com, which is where we have the list of all the topics we've ever done by year to see what kinds of things we have done, because I wasn't sure if we had ever done anything and called it shamanism or if it was just these other individual topics that I remembered. So you're right, we haven't done anything called shamanism, but we have, in this past year, we have talked about totems and spirit guides, which is somewhat related to shamanism, or a part of shamanism. Last year we talked a little bit about meditation in some videos, and we did a week about trance, which is a pretty big part of shamanism, or is one way of looking at a big part of shamanism. Year 3, so 2 years ago, we talked about totems and guides again, and we also talked about trance dancing. In year 2, we talked about spirit guides, and in year 1, we talked about familiars and totems in 1 week, spirit guides in another week, and we also talked about alternative and complementary medicine, which may or may not involve things that are also shamanistic practices. So if you're interested in any of those things, definitely go and check out our past videos as well. But now we have a video that's just called Shamanism, or whatever I titled this video. So, according to Wikipedia, I know people are sometimes worried about using Wikipedia because, well, anyone can edit it. That's true, but they also have people checking the sources, and you can always make sure to scroll down to the bottom of the article and go to the sources and the references that they've actually used to create that article and find out what those sources have to say. So I think Wikipedia is a great place to get a very basic view of things, and we even, when I was a writing assistant and a teaching assistant in undergraduate school for the freshmen and my younger classmen, we always recommended go ahead and look at the Wikipedia to give yourself a working knowledge and then use those references as a kickoff point. You don't want to cite Wikipedia usually. I do it here because this is an informal thing, but in a research paper you wouldn't cite Wikipedia, you would go to the sources that it uses. So, Wikipedia does cite the 2 sources it has for this definition. It defines shamanism as a practice that involves a practitioner reaching altered states of consciousness in order to encounter and interact with the spirit world and channel these transcendental energies into this world. And the second part of the definition is a shaman is a person regarded as having access to and influence in the world of benevolent and malevolent spirits who typically enters into a trance state during a ritual and practices divination and healing. Now, I chose to quote that because those things happen to match what I know to be true about the definition of shamanism. So that's another reason I go to Wikipedia for quick quotes of things if I already know the information and I'm just looking for the exact wording. But I do also have some of my books that are sort of about shamanism. So from the Everything Paganism book, which is by Selene Silverwind, she says, in its earliest form, shamanism was a religion in the sense that shamans had religious roles in the tribe. Their primary function was to maintain harmony between the human realm and the spirit realm. Not every member of a tribe was or could be a shaman. Becoming a shaman required a calling and extensive training. Then she goes on to talk about how shamanism didn't just develop in one place, but it sprang up in multiple cultures all over the world. And, quote, despite the seeming differences between shamanic cultures, Michael Harner, a noted anthropologist, discovered that certain practices and beliefs are common to nearly all shamanic cultures. He calls these commonalities core shamanism. And if you check the references in the links in the description to this video, I've also put a link to his website. But for the most part, shamanism anymore is not considered a religion all in itself, but is more a series of practices that can be involved in many different religions. As Selene puts it, a practice and a philosophy that can be used within any religious framework. In By Oak, Ash, and Thorn by DJ Conway, the author includes all of that basic information as well as stating, a true shaman is usually a healer first, a prophet second. The Wikipedia article also states that there is no single agreed upon definition for shamanism among anthropologists. So it's one of those things that is sort of means different things to different people, has sort of a specific origin, but has come to mean many things. So the word shaman appears to have roots in the Turco-Mongolian languages, and that is quoted from this book, Silverwind, and it was used by Europeans to describe the practices of those that they encountered in Siberia. Variations of the word appear in many cultures throughout the continent of Asia, and Westerners now use it too. There is some debate, as there usually always is, about whether certain cultures' practices should be termed shamanism because those cultures didn't use the word themselves. It's not a word native to those cultures. Or some other arguments talk about that they shouldn't be called shamanism because they are not the culture that was originally described by the word. For example, it was originally used to talk about the people of Siberia, so any shamans other than those in Siberia shouldn't technically be called shamans because they weren't the original ones used about whom that word was used. That's the other argument. But, as Silverwind states in the Everything Paganism book, the fact that anthropologists continue to use this term to apply to a variety of different cultures means that it has evolved to mean the practices that include trance and ecstasy as a means of accessing the spirit realm for the purposes of healing. She continues, people who use the term shaman to describe the practices of Native Americans, for example, are applying the modern definition rather than its original meaning. People who combine shamanism with other cultural frameworks point to lore that suggests that while other cultures didn't use the word shaman, or any word similar to it, they still engaged in shamanistic practices, or shamanic practices, She suggests that if you don't want to use the word shamanic or shaman for a practice that is yours that fits these categories, if you're just not comfortable using that for whatever other reason, she suggests journeying as an appropriate alternative term. Gede Parma, in his book By Land, Sky, and Sea, says that, quote, witchcraft is a shamanistic spiritual tradition, speaking about the fact that our practices are reflected upon one another throughout different cultures. So, how does one become a shaman? Virtually all of the sources will mention something about the fact that it involves being called to the position. It involves a calling, as well as intensive training to answer that call. Generally, the things that you'll read about it also say that the shaman usually undergoes a near-death experience or becomes very ill in some way as part of this process of answering the call. It's the idea of being a wounded healer, and that once they experience being sick, they can better understand people who are sick, and that can be in any capacity, physically, mentally, spiritually, and then in the process of healing themselves and understanding their own healing, they are better able to understand how to heal others. The Wikipedia article, when you scroll down further, also talks about shamanism in multiple different cultures, and one of the cultures it mentions is the Hmong culture. Hmong. So I wanted to mention that after I read By Oak, Ash, and Thorn a couple of years ago, literally right after finishing that, I was in a class where we were required to read The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, A Hmong Child, Her American Doctors, and the Collision of Two Cultures by Anne Fadiman. It has to do with a Hmong family, I know I'm not pronouncing that exactly right, sorry, and their daughter who has what Westerners would term epilepsy. She has seizures, but in their culture is seen as sort of an honor and an initiation of sorts because the word in their language translates to the spirit catches you and you fall down. So it's something having to do with the spirit. And the book is all about the difference between those cultures, and they're arguing and trying to come to terms with, you know, the Westerners want to do this for her treatment, but in their culture, this is considered appropriate. So it's this back and forth. And it was a discussion-based class. So in the class, we naturally had some discussions about Western medicine versus Eastern medicine and different beliefs and things like that. And I remember at one point, because the Hmong culture is a shamanistic culture, we were talking about shamanism, and someone in the class said something like, oh, I would never, if I were in that situation, if I were in their country, I wouldn't just go by their rules. I would never let them just treat me with that, like, hoodoo, witchcraft, booga booga, like someone said booga booga at one point. I don't know if it was the same person. But I remember her saying, like, hoodoo, witchcraft, and they were making all these assumptions about how it works and this and that, and they were like, I don't want this to happen, like, sacrificing chickens because this, and they just were not getting, like, what it really meant, because the only exposure they had to it was this book, and it doesn't go incredibly in depth. It just tells you sort of this is what it is. So I was really happy that I got to be in that class, because it was a nursing majors only class, but I was able to get into it because it fulfilled another requirement, and myself and another friend of mine kind of argued our way into it from the literature, theater, English standpoint. Otherwise, we would not have been taking that class in the first place, but I was really glad that I was able to be there, because then I could say I actually just finished reading a book on Celtic shamanism. So it's not the same culture, but shamanism is the same basic practices, so I can tell you from the knowledge that I have of that book that that's not how it works, and it's actually like this, and this is actually what the goal is. And it was just one of those situations where people were making wild accusations and just assuming crazy things, thinking, that's complete nonsense because it's from another culture. It's something that they don't understand. And yet, because I was there, they were able to learn a little bit more about it from the religious standpoint, as well as what this book itself already offers you. So I can't tell you anything specifically about Native American shamanism, because I don't have a book specifically about Native American shamanistic practices or shamanic practices, but we have done some videos in the past about trance and other things of that nature, and these are the books that I have read on the subject so far. By Oak, Ash, and Thorn, Modern Celtic Shamanism by DJ Conway. There is a section about shamanism in the Everything Paganism book by Selene Silverwind. By Land, Sky, and Sea, 3 Realms of Shamanic Witchcraft by Gede Parma, who is a friend of Brendan's, our Monday substitute, so we have a connection in that way. I read through this book last year, and Brendan's worked with it as well in the past. And I also have Totem Magic, Dance of the Shapeshifter by Yasmine Galenorn. I'm not sure if that's how you say her last name. But so this is related to shamanism, but specifically focuses on working with totems and shape-shifting and trance work and things like that. So that is very cool. And then just again for reference, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down is by Fadiman. And the names of all those books are in the description, as well as references, where you will find a link to the Wikipedia article, the Encyclopedia Britannica page on shamanism, the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, which was founded by Michael Harner, who was mentioned in the Silverwind book, as well as, I believe, Conway quotes him as well, and Parma might as well, I can't remember. There's also a link to shamanism.com, which is the Dance of the Deer Foundation Center for Shamanic Studies, founded by Brant Secunda, and that one is specifically for his tribe of people from Mexico, a specific group of people. There are also links to the Sacred Texts article page for Shamanism in Siberia. There's lots of interesting things on there. I was just clicking through briefly. And there's also a link to the Shamanism category as a whole on Sacred Texts, so you can see the multiple different texts that they have on shamanism on that website. And then Gede Parma in By Land, Sky, and Sea also quotes from the book Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, and there's a link to that book on Amazon in the description as well. So that took a little bit longer to record than I intended, I apologize. But hopefully that helps you get a little bit of a sense for it, as well as provides some sources about it. And I do hope that if you're interested in any of the specific things, the specific practices that we have covered on Pagan Perspective, go ahead and check those out from the past. There's a link to the blog in the description as well, as always. It's always down there, paganperspectivecollab.blogspot.com, and you just go to the different tabs for the different years and use your computer's find function, which on a PC is Control F. I believe on a Mac it's Command F, and just type in keywords like trance, meditation, totem, spirit guide, whatever, and if we did it in that year, it'll come up for you. You have to go through the different years though. I used to have it all in one, but it was just way, way too long, and it was like ruining the blog. So I had to break it up into separate years, but those link directly to the videos, so you can click there and immediately view the videos that we have. So it's not all the way up to date to today, but it's up to date as of a few months before the previous. So because anything really recent you can just view on the channel. Or you can just search for it on the channel. I just think it's easy to look it up on the blog as well. So either way. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you, next week. I have one more week, and then we have 2 subs weeks this month. So until then, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye. Oh, and I'm doing Veda on my personal channel, Vlog Every Day in April. I'm posting a video every day in April vlogging about my day and other stuff. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Bye!